Hi guys, Mr. G Haunter here. Hope you're doing well. In tonight's video, we're diving into the creepiest things that have happened to people, moments that still stick with them long after they're over. Before we go any further, make sure to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy creepy content like this. Now, let's take a look at today's horror clip from our beloved friend, Shebob.
This door cam footage shows what looks like a white silhouette passing in front of the camera. At first, it's easy to dismiss it as smoke or mist. The shape is thin, light, and almost transparent. But if you watch closely, it doesn't behave the way smoke normally does. It changes direction, it holds its shape, and for a brief moment, it moves with purpose.
No leaves are moving in the background, so it's not the wind. Could be a ghost.
When I lived in London, as a teen, I was walking over a hill alongside heavy traffic and a car door suddenly opened and a man leapt out and grabbed my arm and started trying to drag me into his car, completely out of the blue. I remember his grip digging into my skin and me planting my feet firming on the ground and pulling back. I don't think he expected me to be that strong. I remember just knowing I wanted anything but to be in that car with him. I have no idea why he thought it was a good idea to attempt this while stuck in heavy traffic. In general, I don't want to think about what his intentions were, and I'm glad I never found out. He released me when another occupant in his car yelled something to the effect of "Come on, it's not worth it," and the car stuck behind beeped and someone in it yelled something like "What the hell are you doing?" The traffic was moving forwards a little. But the car's back door was still wide open and the driver wasn't moving the car while he waited for this guy who grabbed me, holding up the traffic behind it. I think someone in the car behind even got out of their car to physically intervene, but I had tunnel vision and I can't say that for certain. I was heading out to meet with a friend, but I immediately turned around and went home after this happened. I've long since moved from that area, but I was scared of going out alone for the longest time. And I absolutely never went near that hill to the point of taking long detours to avoid it. I tried to tell my parents what happened after I got home, but they didn't believe me, and didn't think to check or memorize the number plate unfortunately. I really wish I did, but I think I was too young to realize how useful that would have been. Either way, I really wish I reported this to the police, but I didn't for reasons I won't go into since this comment is long enough already. Not long after the first Ring movie came out on DVD, I watched it at my friend's house, then hung out for a while, then went home. Going home was a 1-mile drive down a straight country-ass road in the middle of a pine forest. It was probably around 1 or 2 a.m. About halfway to my house I saw something bright white, damn near glowing in the dark. As I got closer I saw it was a young girl, I'd guess 15 at the absolute oldest, waving at me. Scared the out of me and I sped home, jumped out of my car and ran in the house probably faster than I've ever moved in my life. Thinking about it later I figure it was probably some young girl meeting up with some older guy, which is still creepy. Another time a friend was giving me a ride home and we decided to stop at a little pavilion on a small lake about 3/4 of a mile from my house. It was probably 2:30 or 3 a.m. We were sitting there by the water for a little while and she decided she wanted to go home. I told her I was going to hang out here for a bit longer and walk home later. Not long after she left, I'm sitting there in basically complete darkness when, it was probably some animal, but it sounded exactly like someone was walking up on me in the woods. I even swear I heard something being whispered. My phone came out with the flashlight on in record time. And I was waving it around say, "It's cool, it's all cool, I'm heading home now, it's all cool." I walked the approx 3/4 of a mile home backwards waving my phone around and saying it's cool. I'm heading home, it's all cool. Seeing that young girl freaked the out of me, but I was in a car and already heading away. This probable animal terrified me far more because I was on foot, in the dark, in a forest. If it was anything besides a squirrel I'd been screwed. Last winter I had just moved back in with my parents in the suburbs after a breakup. My parents had been on vacation in Europe for about a week, so I was home alone. I went to bed around 11 and woke up a few hours later to 3 loud knocks on the front door. I eventually fell back asleep, and then about an hour later, I started hearing drawers opening in what I assumed was my parents' room, which they had locked before leaving. Kind of assumed my dad must have come back from his trip early, so I fell asleep again. Woke up feeling someone standing over me, groggily asked, "Dad? That you?" And he said yes and kissed me on the back. My back was to him and my sleep mask was on, so I didn't see anything. Didn't see my dad all day, so I assumed he was sleeping because of jet lag. Called my ex later that day and mentioned my dad coming home early. My ex was super weirded out and told me to call my parents, so I did and they were still on vacation. When they came back, nothing was missing from their room. To be honest, I was so severely depressed that I genuinely didn't care if I lived or died, so I wasn't too freaked out about this at the time. But looking back, I realize it was super messed up. I would occasionally fall asleep on the sofa with my girlfriend already in bed and just end up staying there for the night. This one time I woke up in the early hours to hear her creeping around doing something near the front door, walking softly across the room close to the sofa, stopping for a few seconds and then walking away. In my sleepy state, I vaguely remembered something about her needing to leave early for work, so I just rolled over and went back to sleep. I then became aware that there was a strong, cold breeze in the room. I realized that the front door was wide open and thought my girlfriend had accidentally not closed it properly. I got up to close it and glanced at the clock. It was 3 a.m. That wasn't my girlfriend that had been walking around. I'd left the front door unlocked like an idiot. Someone had been going up the street trying outdoors, found mine open, came in my house, walked up where I was sleeping. And, thanks God, noped out after finding me lying there on the sofa. I am a woman living most of the time on my own in a ground floor flat which I own in central London in a nice enough street. I have lived here for many years. There is one flat above me which was sold a few years ago to a creepy man living on his own. He is a divorced NHS counselor for families. The guy has a creepy vibe and sometimes just stands outside my flat door at night making weird noises or jumps up and down banging on the floor late at night. Other times he goes quiet when I am in my flat on the phone talking to friends and then weirdly will repeat outside my door what I have said on the phone. Sound travels in old Victorian flats. He told the neighbors when he moved in a few years ago that he thought I should give him half of my garden as he was the man of the house. Another time he said that I attacked his son. The reverse was true. His son, another creep who was visiting at the time, shoved me and told me to get out of the communal hallway. He then called the police and said I was crazy and dangerous and that he worked for the NHS in mental health. I was arrested and then released as there was absolutely no evidence against me and I have never committed a crime. This weird psycho neighbor who is a therapist is absolutely the creepiest thing ever to happen to me. It didn't really happen to me, but watching a sociopathic pastor use my sister as a pawn, and my mom to a lesser extent, in his and his wife's in real-life game of The Sims was surreal. I could tell he was a skeeve from day one, and I was stepping away from the church anyways. But, my sister and my mom were faithful and these people were charming. They did try to drag me into their nonsense every now and then, and my mom and sister claimed that the church would help with whatever they were told I was going through, but I could always see right through them and the words they would put in other people's mouths. This all happened a decade ago, but my sister only reconciled with some previous church friends last month due to all the damage they did. Fortunately, the pastors were socially ran out of town, aka, an actual pastor from a parent church saw what was going on and rescinded their fellowship. In the days of social media, this was enough to destroy their reputation, finally. So they skipped town to do it all over again in one of the Carolinas or something. They even tried to get my sister to go with them after they struggled to find support. Mike and Heather Mills, y'all are snakes and you'll always be found no matter how tall the grass gets. You'll never get back the power and control you felt while slinging crack, Mike. I was living in a flat with this dodgy downstairs apartment. Every single person in this flat, after living there for a few weeks, would start to crawl in and out of the window instead of using the door, and then something disturbing would happen to them. There was one girl who hung herself, followed by a man who was on the run and was arrested, followed by the grand finale of a man which is featured in the story. So this man was red flags all over. He would be caught outside waving a catapult around, offering all kinds of substances to people and inviting all kinds of weirdos into his flat. He also told me he has a cheap Xbox for sale that he stole from his sister and had to fight her for it. One day I saw a neighbor who said she said this lad in town getting arrested, but he broke free and ran away. The police came and searched the whole block and found nothing. Next morning, I came out of my flat and all across the hallway were clothes. These were clothes I was storing in my little cupboard right outside the door ready to donate. They were just thrown everywhere. I knew it must be him, so I phoned the police and told them. They came back and found nothing. I knew he was hiding somewhere and I was so paranoid. It all blew over and I forgot about it. A few weeks later I went in the shed downstairs to get my bike. Inside were cigarettes, ashes and ends all over the floor, man's clothes, half-eaten food, tons of beer cans, and the creepiest part was an Xbox with strands long red hair hanging from the sellotape holding the box together. Why my clothes? Why my shed? How did he lock the door when he was done? I still have no idea. They housed someone else a few months later and he started crawling through the window after a few weeks of being in the flat. Then he was arrested for attacking his girlfriend. Some backstory: when I was at school, there was a spate of sexual assaults on kids walking home. The same guy, always the same description, he was never caught. When I was 15, I was walking home with my friend. At a certain point, she went one way and I went another, across a railway bridge, which was a shortcut home. When I would get to the top of the railway bridge, I would wave to my friend who I could see walking from there. On one occasion, when I waved to her, she was jumping up and down and trying to shout something to me, but I couldn't hear her. A minute or two later, an adult started walking across the bridge from the other side and my friend stopped trying to shout to me. I carried on home. The next day, she told me that a guy, matching the description of the attacker, had started following me across the bridge, so she was trying to tell me to run, but when the person from the other side started crossing, the guy following me turned back. I do wonder if that person crossing was the reason I wasn't attacked or if it was a totally innocent guy who turned back for a totally innocent reason. I always walked the long way home after that. It was before we all had mobile phones, but my mom got me one pretty quickly after I told her that anecdote. I've been abused my entire life by family and partners etc. For context for this story, I still don't know if it's paranormal or not. I'm more of a logical person, so I don't really believe in paranormal stuff, but basically my mother has always been a crack addict. She would abuse me severely and leave me at crack dens for days or just neglect me for weeks. My father got very sick with cancer and her issues got way worse while he was in hospice. She also had a lot of crackhead friends. I was around 6 or 7 at this time. So one night me and my mom were in bed and she was watching Paranormal Activity while I was just drawing. My dad was downstairs sleeping in his hospital bed. My mom fell asleep and I was still awake drawing. When I looked up from my paper at the doorway, there was a woman wearing an all-white dress. Her eyes were extremely wide and unblinking and she was soaking wet just staring at me in the hallway. I obviously panicked and tried really hard to wake up my mom, but she was too high to actually wake up. She stood there for a good 10 minuets staring at me while I was shaking my mom crying until eventually she lifted her finger to her mouth and shushed me, staring me dead in the eyes. I hid under the blanket for a few minuets and when I looked back up she was just gone. I can't remember what happened after that, but I do remember telling my parents in the morning. But my mom just said I was probably dreaming after watching that movie, but I didn't watch the movie, and I distinctly remember not being able to fall asleep after that. I'm thinking it either was a really vivid dream or one of her crackhead friends broke in to steal her drugs and they were high and it was raining out or something. This was one of many of my mother's friends breaking into our house, and now I have severe nyctophobia. And trauma to the point where I have at least 5 locks on my deadbolted door. I lived in a rural area, so it was rare for us to have spontaneous visitors. I had neighbors close by but knew all of them since it was a small town. I was about 14 or 15, watching TV in the living room and a man pulled into our driveway on his bike. I remember thinking it was weird, but it was a nice day and sometimes we did have kids on the street ride their bikes through our driveway, so I brushed it off. He got off his bike and started to pet my cat. And then wandered off to the side of my house where I could no longer see him. By this point I was fully freaked out, but again, I'm trying to rationalize because we did live in a farm town, so I thought maybe he's got the wrong address and is buying something from someone. I called my mom and sister and explained the situation. I'm not sure whether I didn't explain enough. I just didn't have the wariness I do now. They weren't taking it seriously, or why I navigated it this way. But I remember they reassured me not to worry and it was likely what I thought and they would be home soon. I took that call in my bathroom. By the time I got off the phone I was back sitting on my living room couch. The man had come back to the front of my house and very relaxed, stepped up into our front garden, pressed his face on our window and looked directly at me where I was sitting on the couch. I literally froze and couldn't look at him. It was like I told myself if I froze he won't be able to see me, but obviously he did, so I looked over at him and the only thing I could say was, "What are you doing?" In the moment this was terrifying. I thought I was going to die, but I kind of laughed thinking about my initial reaction because it almost played out like a comedy sketch. It actually set in and got really scary when I realized who he was. He started talking to me from the window, and to keep it short, I don't think he expected anyone to be home when he did this, or was hoping to find my mom. He initially tried to tell me he stopped by and saw my nice cat and wanted to pet him. I think he could tell I wasn't buying it, so he eventually admitted he was a former co-worker of my mom and came by to look for her. Come to find out, this married man had a very creepy obsession with my mother and had been making advances toward her for a while. I learned after this incident that she once caught him watching her while she was sleeping in the woman's dorm at work. He left lingerie and other gifts in our mailbox, and made her overall uncomfortable. She shut him down, had to report him to their supervisor, and I don't think he could accept no as an answer. She tried to tell his wife, but she did not take it well at all and got angry with her. I still don't even know to this day how she got him to leave her alone. But I know we moved away, so he doesn't know where we live. Summer 2023. I was hospitalized for several months after a severe bout of diverticulitis, fully recovered now. I was stuck in a small hospital room alone, on my back with a massive surgical incision going down my entire abdomen. I couldn't even really turn on my side. I wake up very late at night one night, hearing the most gut-wrenching quiet sobbing I've ever heard in my life. The door to my room was always left open so nurses could hear me. But there was a thick curtain that could be drawn across the doorway, to block out the light from the hallway. The curtain was closed, the door was open. It sounded like someone was standing directly behind the curtain and just crying their heart out. It wasn't loud, attention-grabbing sobbing, but this awful kind of tired, hopeless cry. There were no free roaming patients on that floor, and I had no neighbors in the rooms on either side of me. The nurse station was a ways down the hall. I couldn't see anyone, and I couldn't move, given that I was still kinda split open from end to end. I didn't know what to do, so I put my mask back on and went back to sleep. I don't know why I didn't think to call a nurse, or say something, or whatever. The delightful amount of Dilaudid I was on at the time probably had something to do with how calm I was about it. I think I mostly just went, well, this is definitely the kind of place that attracts this kind of energy, and left it at that. My creepy story is I was at the grocery store shopping and this man seemingly kept ending up in all the same places of the store I was in. Didn't think too much of it at first. For context, it wasn't a super big store. I keep seeing him linger in the areas I'm in but keep moving on. Eventually he leaves his small hand basket he's using to shop on the ground. I didn't notice it at first and went to the area he left it in to grab something. When I did, he conveniently shows up and says he left his basket there, but doesn't really say anything, just kind of gestures to it. At this point, I'm getting suspicious that he's following me, so I call my boyfriend at the time. I tell him what's happening, but he's at work. He stays on the phone with me as long as he can until I felt safe enough. I see the guy go to checkout and all he has is a small basket and I have a full cart. I'm thinking now I should be in the clear since the guy's going to be leaving the store soon. I go up to checkout, he finishes before me and goes to leave the store. I see him get just outside the doors and stop and wait. So, now I'm like, okay, yeah, he's definitely following me. But, still kinda try to brush it off, thinking maybe he's waiting for a ride. Everything was confirmed the moment I walked out of the store and he starts walking to his car too. He actually waited for me to exit the store. Now I'm really creeped out. I call my BF again and tell him what's happening. I don't want this guy to see what car I'm driving and potentially follow me. So I waited for like a good 5 to 10 minutes by the cart return, and finally, after what felt like forever, he leaves. Thankfully, this story has a happy ending and nothing happened. What was scary about the timing of it all was I kept seeing posts about sex traffickers being pretty active in the area I was in. Not only that, several posts in my town at that time about men following women in stores. Maybe it was just a creepy guy being weird. Or maybe I was really close to getting snatched. I'll never know. Back in December 2019, the cutter I was stationed on at the time was conducting a patrol just north of Hispaniola. It was a bright, full moon night, the sea state was calm, and the air was warm. A fellow shipmate and I were standing detainee watch over some drug smugglers we had caught a couple of days prior, with a fellow watchstander on the flight deck facing towards the back of the ship. We were both having a hard time staying awake. He had basically crashed in a lawn chair we kept in the flight deck hangar, and I was leaning against the smokestack fighting the back of my eyelids. Suddenly, out of nowhere in the middle of the warm Caribbean air night, I got this weird feeling like I was being watched. My tiredness has instantly disappeared, and I looked around the group of snoring smugglers that were asleep on the flight deck in front of me, thinking one of them had woken up and called out to use the bathroom. No one was awake, so I went to settle back into my relaxed stance when suddenly my eyes met this entity about 50 yards directly ahead of me at the back of the flight deck near the railing. It was about 10 feet tall, was draped in long, dark, flowing drapes, appeared to be hovering in place under the moonlit sky, had a dark pointed hood, and two bright burning reddish-orange eyes where its face and eye sockets should have been. Imagine Ghost of Christmas yet to come from A Christmas Carol for visual aid. I went into instant freeze mode and felt like I couldn't move for about 3 minutes, as if this thing had locked me in a trance. Eventually, for whatever stupid reason, I was able to muster up some courage and started walking slowly towards it. Before I could get 5 steps in, this being slowly turned, floated across the flight deck and then faded into the black of the night. I went back to my post and asked my fellow shipmate if they had just seen what I saw. Of course he didn't, because he was asleep. I called up to the bridge of the ship to confirm if any of the crew had been on the flight deck in the last 5 minutes, and they said no one had been. Spent the rest of the mid-watch freaked out, but locked in, and went down to sleep after being relieved. It gets weirder. The next morning, I made my way up to the ship's combat center where I worked, and one of my senior petty officers, 17 plus years spent at sea, could tell I was feeling restless. He asked me what was up, and I told him he wouldn't believe what I had seen last night. Before I could even start the story, this man says, "Let me guess, you saw," and proceeds to describe in detail down to the exact color of the entity's eyes. I sit there dumbfounded and just nod yes and asks how he knows. He says to me, "You saw Jumbie," and goes on to tell me that several other members had seen it around the ship in years past. Such as a lookout felt a dark presence over their shoulder on the bridge wing, but when they turned, it disappeared. Mess cook was down collecting food from the dry stores, and when they flipped on a light they saw this dark figure disappear around the corner, but only when we are sailing around Hispaniola. He goes on to tell me that Jumbie is a demonic spirit that haunts ships around the Caribbean islands, specifically Hispaniola, and tortures the crew in certain ways. Ironically, our ship ended up breaking down shortly after the occurrence, and we had to spend a week sitting pier side in Gitmo Bay awaiting parts before getting back underway, where we were run ragged with cases for the next 3 weeks before we could go home. We were able to Google it later, and sure enough, a few of the images that came up with the search matched fairly well with what I seen the night before. Haven't had an encounter quite like that since, but the image of those burning reddish-orange eyes, pointed hood, and the flowing black drapes in the wind and moonlit sky has yet to escape my memory. When I was 8, I was standing at the school gate, that opened to a park, waiting to be picked up. My mum was on the other side of the park talking to someone and was taking ages, so I decided to walk to her. As I went past a row of bushes, I heard a man clear his throat. I looked up to see him step toward me, reaching to grab my arm, completely naked. He asked me to come with him. I ran as fast as I could, screaming out to my mum, who was mad at me for screaming and continued talking. So I didn't tell her about the man until after we got home. The police did end up finding him months later after he kidnapped a kid. He was studying to be a teacher. Just remembered another one. My partner and I were watching TV in bed late one night and suddenly heard heavy footsteps on our deck and what sounded like someone trying the door handle. Then a couple months later I was really sick, so my partner went out to grab medicine at 10 p.m. Shortly after he left I heard someone try to open the front door, but in my sick sleepy state I thought it was my partner coming back because he forgot something. Then I fell asleep. I didn't realize it wasn't him until he came home and I asked if he had come back home because he forgot something, and he hadn't. It was a very small thing. I was fishing with my mum, and she suddenly said, "What is that?" I looked where she was pointing, over to our left where the bay curved out. There was what looked like a puff of dark gray smoke against the rest of the overcast sky, just above the dunes. We thought it was from a tractor, as there are a few very old diesel models that people in the area use to tow their boats across the sand to the upper harbor. But there were none around that day. Then it started moving. It's really hard to explain in text, but imagine like a puff off smoke fading out, but then coming back, in a sort of circle pattern. Not like where it's up and down, but back to forward, fading in and out, like it was getting closer then further away. It did this for about a minute before fading completely. Mum and I both saw it, wondered what it was and commented how it was weird, then went back to fishing. But then when I brought it up later to tell her husband about it, she denied ever seeing it. I didn't describe it as some kind of supernatural thing, didn't claim aliens or ghosts or whatever. Just retold a story that happened about 2 hours earlier. Mum refused to acknowledge it. She doesn't believe in anything remotely supernatural. She rolls her eyes at the thought of those topics. This was such a randomly weird thing to see, that I couldn't explain, that we both saw. And acknowledged in the moment multiple times, but Mum suddenly said it didn't happen. It's such a nothing story, nothing happened then and nothing probably ever will. But I don't know, it was just weird and creepy. When I was in college I lived in a house with 2 roommates, and we had neighbors with kids. My bedroom was on the main level in front of the front door. One night I wake up and see a little boy in my doorway. I sit up and ask him why he's there. No answer. I assume he's the neighbor's kid, and I tell him he needs to go home. Nothing. Then I notice he's dressed in vintage clothing. Like a tweed vest and pageboy cap. Odd. He moves closer to me and sits on my shoe stand that was right beside me, and he starts swinging his legs nonchalantly. This is when my heart starts to race and I don't think it's the neighbor boy anymore. Then I watch in horror as he opens his mouth to speak, but his mouth is just a gaping hole with no tongue or teeth. The black hole begins to widen until it envelopes his entire face. Meanwhile I can feel myself getting pulled in closer to him, and I try to scream but nothing comes out. It felt like a long time before it ended. Then he went back to normal, bounced up off the shoe stand, and walked out of my room. I didn't hear the front door open, but he was gone. About 10 years ago, I can't remember the exact year, but it was the year of the whole creepy or killer clown phenomenon that swept the US. My, now ex-boyfriend and I were up late one night and decided to go for a long walk, which we often like to do at night. It was about 3 a.m. and we were about a mile away from home, walking down the major road that we lived off of, with no one around since it's a pretty quiet suburban area. A car drove past us, came to a screeching halt, suddenly reversed down the road at a high rate of speed until they were a ways behind us, and parked in the center turn lane. My BF shouted "Run!", grabbed my arm, and started bolting like a second before all of the doors of the car opened and out jumped 4 guys in creepy clown masks waving baseball bats. One shouted "Get back here!" and another shouted "Get them!" My boyfriend eventually let go of my arm. I was holding him back because I was very out of shape and a cigarette smoker, and I could hear these guys gaining on me while I wheezed for air and started crying. We ended up cutting down the first side street we came across and ran through backyards before we finally lost them. Still don't know what the hell that was about, whether it was just a bunch of little stuffs just trying to scare us or people who actually had bad intentions, but the whole incident still haunts me. Shortly after my childhood dog passed, I was lying in bed on my stomach, just waking up, when I felt weight like he had just jumped onto my bed and felt the weight slowly move up the bed, matching the pace of his gait back when he was alive. I moved my hand around to reach for him, but he wasn't there. A couple weeks later, I woke up at 6 a.m. because I heard my dad coming down the stairs. He's a larger man. And he steps in a very particular way, so I was convinced he was going to ask me to do some chore or whatever. I listened as the footsteps hit the landing, then made their way to my door. I heard a knock and then my father's voice call my name. I didn't respond initially, because I didn't want to be awake, but after about 10 seconds I didn't hear him leave, so I yelled, "What?" I waited and heard no response, nor did I hear him go back upstairs. I shrugged it off and went back to sleep. That night he picked me up from work and I asked him what he had wanted. He said he had still been asleep at that time. A couple weeks after that, I'm waking up again, laying on my side when the weight jumps onto my bed again, but instead of lumbering up the bed, it felt like it sprinted up the bed to the back of my neck. I felt a hot breath on my neck or ear and heard a hoarse whisper saying "baby." I stayed stock still for about a minute before rolling over, half expecting to see someone or something there, but I was alone. My final experience in this succession of sleep paralysis adjacent hauntings was a couple months later, when I went to rehab in New Mexico. That night it was a full moon and I had a crazy dream about being chased up a beach by this massive wolf-deer hybrid thing and I had to crush it to death with a massive boulder. I woke from the dream to the full moon shining through my window with a solid black silhouette of a man standing above me, his arm outstretched with a single finger pointing at me. I stared directly at the figure and felt myself involuntarily raising off the bed with my mouth open, as if to take his finger into my throat. I snapped out of it and rolled onto my side, waited a couple seconds, then rolled back over. There was nothing. No sound, no movement. Just me in the dark with the moon shining on me. If that all wasn't weird enough, everyone in the rehab had a dream that night about someone or something getting crushed in one way or another. Just really freaky weird thing. Since I broke the trajectory of my sitting up that night in there, I haven't had any sleep paralysis adjacent experiences or even nightmares. When I was a kid, me and my mom lived in a very bad neighborhood with my stepfather, and I want to note that this stepfather of mine was verbally abusive and angry all the time. So one day as I was sleeping in the well-lit living room, I didn't have a bedroom and the house was small, I saw at the foot of my bed a man standing up looking at me. Now let me tell you that when I was a kid I used to hallucinate a lot. Seeing shadows, people, paintings moving, dolls moving, so I thought it was just another night that I saw something weird and went to sleep with my mom and told her what I saw that time. She told me to pray and not look. Yes, it was that common. Now the thing that struck me the most was the fact that next morning, out of nowhere my stepfather, who never really cared for me, asked me to describe the man to him. I was so taken aback by his unexpected care that I paused for a second before telling him everything. We never spoke about it again. Now the second one is in 2016 to 2017 when we moved out of that house and went to start a new life without him in a new apartment. My mom went to church with my lil sister, and me being a teenager often stayed alone in the apartment, and as I went to heat up some food to eat, I hear my mother's whisper behind me. I looked around and saw nothing. I even called my mom to see if she got home, but I didn't hear anything back. When my mother and sister returned I told her what happened, and she saw me visually shaken up by this, and so she texted the pastor for exorcism in the new apartment. My mother said that the pastor saw a lot of things in my bedroom. I'm still not sure what happened. I don't believe in ghosts and I'm not religious, but I was creeped out by this. When you combine T1 diabetes and PTSD, it results in something like episodes of vascular dementia. So you can be walking, talking, interacting, and driving your car all while completely unaware and acting erratically. And when you come to your senses again 4 to 8 hours later, it's not even a blip. Your brain just pretends that nothing happened and no time went by. The creepiest thing that ever happened to me was sitting in a therapist's office while she explained all of this. She concluded that while it's a known phenomenon, not enough T1 diabetics with PTSD have survived long enough for the condition to be observed and named. That this had probably been happening to me for years, and how it was a miracle that I'd never walked in front of a bus or sat in my car in the garage long enough to die of monoxide poisoning, or eaten too many desserts without taking insulin and going into a coma. Or any of the myriad other ways people with T1 diabetes and PTSD have accidentally managed to off and or critically injure themselves. I'm still here 6 years later. Still have PTSD and T1 diabetes, for which there is no cure or remission. Just waiting for truck and dementia to decide which one of them has first dibs. I was on vacation with my boyfriend at the time in the Dominican Republic. We were on the beach and a man selling cigars approached us. My boyfriend did buy some cigars, he moved on, it started to get later and the vendors were starting to pack up, but there was a booth with a beautiful Larimar stone and I promised a close friend I'd find a piece for her while I was there. We didn't have any more cash on us so we went up to the room to get some. And my boyfriend didn't want to go back down to the beach so I went down alone to buy the stone. The man selling cigars approached me again. He asked me to get him a cup of water from the resort, which I didn't think was terribly unreasonable because it was hot, though if I weren't so much of a pushover sometimes I would have said no. I went to get him the water and when I came back, he leaned in to try to kiss me. I was totally thrown. I was like, oh, no, thank you. And I booked it back to the room. What went through my head was probably unreasonable, but my brain told me that his intentions were not good, and that could have turned into an abduction. Everyone had packed up, no one was on the beach any longer. He could have just taken me and no one would have seen a thing. He didn't want a glass of water, he was trying to get me into a situation. Did not leave my boyfriend's side the rest of the trip. 1. In 2019, I was on the train waiting for my station, boyfriend got down at his station. When I got up from my seat in the train and was standing near the door, that's when a man in his 40s started brushing his body towards me and started speaking lewd words about how my tits were great and he was pushing his body towards my ass. I changed my place, I kept my hand on the metal rod, then he tried to touch my hand. The worst part, other men in the compartment noticed it but didn't take any initiative to stop such mischief. I was already mortified and upset from the fight with my boyfriend, I had little to no strength to fight back that man. The train was running and he had an upper hand to push me down if I fought or hurled abuses at him. I kept quiet and after reaching my station, I hurled abuses at him on getting down from the train. And a police personnel asked me if I was okay, to which I replied that man misbehaved with me, and to which the RPF asked me why did I even enter the general compartment at that night time alone when I should be boarding the ladies compartment. 2. In 2023, I used to receive parcels from online brands. I ordered 2 to 3 lingerie sets. My neighbor, who used to always have a perverted stares towards me, had connection with the postman who always delivered the parcels. The lingerie parcel was running late. That day of delivering my parcel, the postman gave my parcel to my brother, and my brother, after receiving it, hurriedly noticed something was off. The parcel was wet and it was partially opened. When I opened the parcel fully, I noticed there was cum on the lingerie along with piss smell. The handwritten note which the store owner sent me was stained yellow. The lingerie's cups were wet and had yellow-white stains. I immediately asked the Instagram owner. She felt so sorry about this and said it might be tampered on the way by the postman service. She even offered to send me a free lingerie from her store as a compensation. I was so mortified I decided to take legal action against the post service, but my parents were against it. I was a naive 15-year-old who thought she was invincible, and it was late at night in the city of Berlin. I only had a flip phone which at that point had died, and I was taking the public train home, but because it was so late I was very tired and dozed off on the train and missed my stop. I woke up at the final stop where they announced the trains were done running for the night, and I had no idea where I was. I wandered out on the street looking for a coffee shop or cafe where I could plug my phone in so I could call my parents. After finally being able to contact them, I learned there was one more train that would be coming in 20 minutes that could get me home. So while I'm waiting at the empty train station, I realize I'm not actually alone, and there is a woman who appeared to be homeless sitting on the opposite end of the station from me, and she looks to be shuffling cards. She suddenly makes eye contact with me and starts rapidly shuffling the cards without looking away. I kept trying to pretend I didn't see her in the hopes she would back off, but she didn't. The train finally comes and I get on, and from what I could tell, she didn't get on. So I'm riding the 30 minutes train ride home when suddenly the woman appears. She walks down the cart and sits right in front of me. Still maintaining eye contact and still shuffling the cards. She's also mumbling something to herself that I can't hear. I get up and walk to a different area of the train and sit, but she continues staring. She was leaning fully forward with her head turned towards me, staring at me down the train cart. I tried remaining calm and prayed that someone normal would board the train with us and break the tension. Eventually some tired businessman in a suit boarded the train and the woman finally stopped staring at me. I reached my train stop and the walk home was about half a mile and I sprinted the entire way. Never been so creeped out in my life. I was 11 and had just had my birthday a couple days before. Well, my grandmother bought me this terrific telescope and I was out in the front yard of our modest home in Scottsdale, by myself with no babysitter, maybe for the first time, and having a ball looking up at the moon, when, all of a sudden, I started feeling this tingling sensation all over. My testicles started feeling really heavy and I knew something was watching me. I'm getting scared just remembering, and this was 37 years ago. Somewhere in the dark, it was about 10:30 p.m. at this point. After maybe 3 or 5 seconds I stared into this little space on the side of the house between our neighbor's carport and our house, where it was pitch black, and I could feel someone staring at me with malicious intent. Not just watching me, there was evil in that gaze, and my dread was so intense I took off running, leaving my telescope behind. I ran inside, locked the front door, and, panting heavily, turned to look out the slit between the shuttered windows and, no telescope. Maybe 5 seconds had passed between me running, getting inside and locking the door. I never told anyone what happened. My grandmother just accused me of being irresponsible and was furious I'd already lost my present, but I honestly didn't care until that point. That was the most scared I had ever been. I'll never forget that feeling and the hatred and the stare I felt directed at me from the impenetrable darkness that night. I did some modeling for some local fitness centers when I was 17. I had to bring my own photographer. Ended up using this one guy I'd met through work, a customer who had an account with us. I worked in photo finishing, at a company my dad managed. One particular modeling session was at 8 in the morning, so photographer guy said I could spend the night at his studio since I lived about 2 hours away. He hung out with me at the studio that evening. Kept asking me if I did drugs, and how he could get me whatever I wanted. Found that a bit odd. The fact he kept bringing it up, he suggested at some point we shoot some partial nude shots, and I stupidly obliged. Mainly because I'd done some nude posing for art students, I figured this probably was about the same. About 2 hours into it he wants to pose nude with me, with the cam set up on a timer. Gave me some bullshit about contrast of colors. I'm a pale redhead, he's a black guy. I'm like, no, I'm tired, I have to be up early, maybe some other time. He backs off, says he'll bring me breakfast when he comes to pick me up in the morning. He leaves. I'd been getting unnerved the longer I was around him. The studio was starting to creep me out. I was just getting more and more creeped out and started getting a bad feeling. Decided I was going to snoop through some of his portfolios of clients. First ones are pretty normal, glamour shots, some models, nothing weird. Then I found a bunch of folders in a box in a closet he stored props and backgrounds in. Tons and tons of pictures of very young girls, naked. From age 6 to about 13. And he was in the pics naked with some of them, but you could never see his face. He'd have it turned away or covered. These girls looked petrified for the most part, but some looked drugged and just not there. My brain was going a mile a minute. His constant offers of drugs started to make sense. Only thing I couldn't figure was why me? Because I wasn't a little kid. Then it struck me that my physique could be considered very young looking. I was short, freckled, super skinny and basically had no tits whatsoever. I freaked out, called my ex-boyfriend, another guy friend, and about 3 coworkers I was friends with. They all converged on the studio within the hour. I showed them the pics. Then we packed them all away and put them back. We gathered my stuff and we left. I stayed with a coworker, and he drove me to my shoot the next morning. Ex-boyfriend shows up to have my back in case things get weird. Photographer creep shows up late and furious I'd left without warning. Says he showed up at the studio at 4 a.m., which alarmed me. Because why the hell would he show up when I would be sleeping? Guy proceeds to have attitude the entire shoot, is sabotaging everything, keeps making veiled threats, and the owner of the fitness center was losing patience with him. And me. I had to pull the guy aside and tell him what was going on, why my ex was there watching the whole thing and glowering at the photographer, and then about the secret box of naked kid pics. I told him about the drug offers and how he wanted to do nude pics with me. I did not tell him I'd done nude pics. Guy makes me stay in his office, gets my ex in there too, tells us to stay in there and not come out. He gets the photographer in another room and has an employee stall him in there. He called my dad. Then he called the police. My dad got there first. He was understandably pissed off. He'd known this guy for years through work. He'd even suggested him as my photographer. Cops show up, take a statement from me and my ex. I told them where to find the box of pics. I don't know what exactly happened that day in regards with the photographer and police, but they did arrest him, and I suppose they had to get a warrant to search his studio. Always pissed me off I never found out what happened with those kids in the photographs. If their parents had dropped them off for normal photos and then it went the way it did. Or if the kids were kidnapped and forced into it. Also has always bothered me that the creep showed up at 4 a.m. when I would have been sleeping. Like, what was he planning to do? That's all for tonight's stories. Some of these moments are simple, but they're creepy in a way that really stays with you. If you made it to the end, thanks for watching, I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video. And let me know in the comments, which story creeped you out the most? Or have you experienced something similar yourself? Until next time. Stay safe, and stay haunted.